When Britain stood alone after Dunkirk with fewer than 7,000 rifles to arm an entire nation, Churchill's government made a desperate decision that would produce one of history's most ridiculous and most brilliant weapons. The Stengun cost £10 to manufacture. £10. In 1940, that was the price of a decent pair of shoes. What emerged from this obscene economy was a submachine gun so crude, so deliberately stripped of everything that gun makers had spent centuries perfecting, that the first time British soldiers held one, they thought it was a joke. Stamped steel, a crude wire stock, a magazine that fed upward at an angle. No fine tolerances, no machined surfaces, just holes and welds and the bare minimum required to make 9mm rounds fire downrange. And yet, this garbage saved Britain from invasion. Let's rewind to the moment that created this weapon. May 1940. The British Expeditionary Force is collapsing across France. Dunkirk becomes a catastrophe, not a triumphant evacuation like the history books pretend, but a routing where men abandon their weapons in the mud and dive into small boats. Over 200,000 rifles lost in 2 weeks. The Home Guard formed in that panic, men armed with sporting rifles and pikes, actually pikes, because that's all there was. Churchill knew that if Hitler came across the Channel now, if German soldiers landed on English beaches, Britain would lose because it simply did not have guns. The military establishment turned to the Lanchester gun, a submachine gun that was beautiful, reliable, expensive, and took 6 months to build. Britain had weeks. So they called in 2 engineers named Shepard and Turpin and gave them an impossible task. Design a submachine gun that could be manufactured by factories with no experience building firearms, using machine tools meant for something else entirely, and it had to work right now. The result was almost offensively simple. No wood furniture. The barrel was just a tube. The bolt was a chunk of steel with a hole drilled through it. The magazines came from Czech designs already in circulation. Assembly lines that normally stamped out dustpans could retool to produce a gun in less than 3 hours of labor. By September 1940, they were rolling off production lines at a rate that would have seemed impossible months earlier. By the end of the war, over 4 million had been built. 4 million, making it the most produced submachine gun in human history. Soldiers hated it at first sight, called it the Stengun, called it the stink gun. The accuracy was abysmal beyond 50 yards because the tolerances were so loose that the parts rattled. It jammed on sand, it jammed on mud. It would fire when you didn't want it to if the safety was worn. Magazine springs wore out constantly. Men complained that it looked like something from a scrapyard. But here's where the irony deepens. In urban warfare, in house-to-house fighting, in the desperate close quarters of jungle combat and street ambushes, those flaws didn't matter. The gun was light, it fired fast, it was reliable enough, and critically, it could be built and distributed faster than any enemy could adapt to it. When British forces fought in North Africa, the Sten proved that cheap didn't mean ineffective. When the Special Operations Executive sent them to armed resistance groups across occupied Europe, they found soldiers who had nothing would suddenly have something. Over 1 million Stens went to partisan fighters who didn't care about precision, they cared about being armed. The gun became synonymous with resistance. German soldiers began recognizing the distinctive rattle of a Sten and knew that the user was dangerous precisely because they had nothing to lose. The genius of the Sten was its existential lesson. In 1940, Britain was supposed to lose. It had no factories, no time, no resources. It could only survive through shameless pragmatism. Build something so simple, so cheap, so deliberately ugly that perfection became impossible. Make the weapon so common that scarcity disappeared. Turn embarrassing limitations into asymmetric advantages. At the end of the war, they melted down millions of them. The Sten had saved Britain, armed the resistance, and proven that when survival is at stake, elegance is a luxury. Sometimes the most powerful weapon looks like garbage.